Good news is being in the telecom industry. The telecom industry has always been seen as a defensive play. We're a very resilient industry where our growth drivers are usually driven by bare necessity. You require connectivity to run data centers, to run this network, businesses, all the way to social usage from consumer. So we're still seeing strong growth across all our footprint and our markets. We've gone through supply chain shocks in the past during COVID. I think this one is slightly different. You have the US, which is a big market, suddenly raising barriers to their suppliers, which are usually Asia-based. A lot of the technology we import, whether they're developed in the West or in the East, actually we import it directly from the suppliers. So actually we don't see a major impact on supply chains in terms of chips, in terms of network equipment for telcos in general. Where we might see an impact and where everyone is sort of holding and bracing to understand what will be the exact implementation is the AI diffusion rule. And how will this apply within the second half of this year? Which countries land in which tiers, and how does that give access to these chips?
So expand on why you're so concerned about that right now, and how could that potentially impact Ooredoo and Qatar?
So we've been very lucky, and at the forefront was Ooredoo. We were one of the first, if not the first, telecom operator in the region to become an Nvidia cloud partner. We actually received the first batch of, and that happened mid of last year. We received the first batch of Nvidia GPUs actually earlier this year. We're in the stage of implementing them and embedding them within our own data centers in Qatar to service first the local demand. We're seeing very strong demand, but now, as you know, the US has issued the AI diffusion rule, classifying countries into different levels in different tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and depending on that, that will determine how much chips they can actually import at a sovereign level. And then, of course, every player. We are very well positioned because we're an Nvidia cloud partner, we're a preferred partner, and this will allow us to deploy these chips faster. We already have batches coming in before this rule is implemented. But this rule also goes into a world where every country is trying to develop what you call sovereign cloud and sovereign AI. So everyone will require some level of localization of these chips. So how these two interplay can be actually an opportunity for Ooredoo.
Okay, but the concern is that the business is still very reliant on foreign chips and at the whim of the Trump administration, which is very happy to change US export controls at the snap of a finger.
That is very true. So as we said, we try to front load as many chips as we can. We already have our business in Indonesia, which is running the latest standard of chips. In Qatar, we received the first batch. We pre-ordered some other chips for our operation in Qatar, and we're looking to deploy them also in other countries where we operate, namely Oman and Kuwait. These are our areas of priority. We're ramping up also data centers expansion and connectivity because they all go into play. But yes, if there is a change of rule, it might have an impact. But going forward, we've rarely seen retroactive changes of rules. So what will be in play, installed, will always give us a head start as we're one of the first operators in the region to have access to these chips.
Indeed. So the other issue here is you've raised over $500 million for this big push into data centers as well. Is what you're seeing in the United States now changing the investment case or the geographic build-out of that data center expansion?
Not at all. It actually has little influence. We're seeing significant expansion on the data center demand. You have to remember that around 30% of the world connectivity flows through this region. Actually, 90% of the connectivity between Europe and Asia flows through this region, and this requires assets on the ground. Plus, every country, whether this country, the UAE, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, we operate in, have quite stringent data localization rules. So a lot of the demand is localized and it's growing. We just expanded our facilities in Qatar, QDC5, which is housing Microsoft Azure and Google. We're already expanding them. We'll probably be tripling the installed capacity within the next 3 years, just facing the demand, and we're looking to expand to at least 120 megawatts before 2030. And we're not seeing any slowdown, and this is just on cloud base. This does not even touch AI demand. However, AI scales up depending on the AI diffusion rule.
Have you expressed these concerns to your partners at Nvidia?
Oh, we're in constant touch with all our partners, the partners at Nvidia, also the vendors, the manufacturers, the OEMs. Look, there is quite a bit of uncertainty and worry. I think all of these players have gone through shocks, and COVID was a major shock in the past. There was the chips restriction a bit before on Chinese. We've gone through this motion a number of times, so we're quite used to it. We're not in panic mode. We're actually planning for them. Also, telcos, given it's a critical infrastructure, we're heavily regulated, and we've been used, dealing with changing regulation is business as usual for us.
So what scale of capital can you actually commit to this AI and data center rollout given this uncertainty? I asked you before if any of this changes the math on your investment, but is it still all systems go?
It's still all system goes. We're still committing roughly at least $1 billion of deployment over the next few years to triple our capacity. All our capacity build out, we're not doing the opportunistic approach of let's build and they will come. We only build when we have anchor tenant. We're a major partner of all the major hyperscalers, whether it's Google, Microsoft, Oracle. The problem we have today is we can't build them up fast enough. So it's a good problem, still a problem, because you can't satisfy fully demand. So we're not seeing any slowdown on that front.
Walk me through the overall landscape here as well, because as you and I have spoken about in the past, the global hyperscalers like AWS, like Microsoft, have all been doubling down in the region. You're working with some of them, but how do you differentiate in this space? And given the fact that margins are also quite thin in the data center business, what is the pathway to profitability for that business unit?
So it's a long-term profitable business. We actually counterbalance this with our consumer telecom business, which is slightly more volatile, slightly more unpredictable, but a huge free cash flow machine. So when you overlay infrastructure in general, and it's not just data centers, and that's our differentiation, you are able to overlay long-term predictable dollarized revenue streams. Where we differentiate ourselves is we're basically the most diversified operator in the region. We operate in 9 countries around the world. We have 160 million subscribers, but we also operate out of the most countries in the Middle East. We have the most landing stations. This is where you connect the cables internationally as a footprint. We connect Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, Algeria, Tunisia, Iraq, Palestine. That's just in the MENA region. But where we also differentiate ourselves is these data centers, they don't exist in a void. You need connectivity, and we've been building up and investing significantly into international connectivity. We just announced FIG, which is a new cable which is connecting the whole Gulf region, starting in Oman all the way to Iraq. That cable by itself will have more capacity than all the existing cables which are already embedded in the region. On the seafloor, it's also to new standard. It will be buried, so much more resilient and secure. But we're also building now, using our footprint, to start building land routes, to go away from the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, which have been saturated hot points. And we're trying to build land-based route going directly from Iraq to the Mediterranean. And this is a very valuable alternative.
Going out on a limb here, but how much of that is also in response to the security issues that we see in the region and the potential to have some of these infrastructure assets being targeted by bad actors? So
a lot of the demand, the security measures we're putting have come from disruption to the services. They're not always nefarious. These cables, a lot of these cables have been built in the past. They were just laid on the seafloor. A dragging anchor could just rip one of these cables. There've been very little new cables built in the last few years. At the same time, what you see is data capacity and data demand has grown nearly by 30% every single year. So these networks are saturated. You need more capacity, more resilience, and more diversity. And Ooredoo, thanks to our footprint, we're one of the sole providers that can provide that whole diversity. And we work with peers around the region, whether it's STC in Saudi, END here, to create that network.
Biggest risk as it stands for the rest of the year, as you see it? We've spoken a lot about the, I guess, uncertainty around the US administration's current approach to trade and tariffs, but what else sits on your risk list right now?
So strangely, the biggest risk will be probably oil price. Our footprint, if you look at it, operates mainly in commodity-driven economies. And as you know, telecoms is a factor of GDP growth. As the GDP of a country grows, telecom usage grows. So if we see persistent drop in commodity price and oil prices, that might have a long-term effect towards the end of the year on our business. But as of today, the guidance we issued at the beginning of the year, we remain committed to it. We believe we'll continue on our trajectory of record year after record year. We're still committing to at least 2 to 3% top line growth and increasing our profit margin to the mid-40s. So we're still very confident.